All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Williams, and I'm the director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis. And I am just delighted to be here to begin another version of Meet the Methodologist, where we take the opportunity to chat with distinguished scholars who are going to be coming to CARMA and giving a webcast presentation. And I really usually get excited about these things, but I'm especially excited to have this opportunity today to talk with our guest, Dr. Joe Hare. Joe spent some time on the faculty at Kennesaw and Louisiana State before recently moving to the University of South Alabama. There's many reasons that I'm excited to chat with Joe. One reason would be that in my first graduate student statistics class, we used the first edition of his book. But more importantly, I seldom have the opportunity to chat with somebody that has over 150,000 citations. Joe is the author of many books. Many of you might know Joe for his book on multivariate data analysis. That's the book that I was mentioning, which is now in his 8th edition. He also has authored Essentials of Business Research Methods, which is in its 4th edition, and more recently has gotten into partial least squares and written the book, A Primer of Partial Least Squares. So many diverse research methods interests, in addition to all of his substantive interests in the area of marketing. So Joe, I'm very excited. Welcome, and I'm very much looking forward to having you visit Lincoln in a few weeks. So let me begin by asking, how did you get interested in all of this stuff? How did you get interested in graduate school, and particularly in quantitative and research methods?
Okay, but before I answer that question, let me add to that list of books something that almost everyone does, and almost no one knows that I also have one of the leading principles of marketing textbooks with Cengage. And so when I'm introduced, it's always about multivariate, where I've been labeled, and no one knows that realistically I've had a long career in the principles of marketing education. And particularly, it's sort of interesting in the sense that people can't understand how someone could be a successful author on the statistics side and at the same time be a successful author on the fundamentals of marketing.
Yeah, well, thank you for reminding us of that.
Okay, so how did I get interested in research? Wow, that's a while back, but I have good memories and many memories. I earned my PhD at the University of Florida. And I don't mean to be critical of my school, but in those days, the University of Florida was not research oriented. In fact, what's happened at the University of Florida in the last, believe it or not, 50 years since I got my degree, is that the degree has been enhanced because of the evolution of the University of Florida toward research and the reputation that they've established over the years. During my program, I learned a lot about marketing, but not much about publishing and not much about research. So I got to my first job, actually, which was at Ole Miss, and I was hired with several colleagues in the same group that I was, and I mean by that, we were all interested in doing research, but we hadn't been trained very much in that area. So a small group of individuals, we were all assistant professors wanting to be successful, but we clicked and we developed a culture of working on articles, and our wives used to tell us that when we left town with them, we would come back and the first thing that we would do is go to the College of Business to check the mail to see if in the mail there were any either revise and resubmits or perhaps, and not frequently enough in those days, acceptances. But really what got me into the research, and this I'm sure is not surprising, is my early interest in multivariate. And when I say early interest, it really wasn't early in the doctoral program. It was late in the doctoral program, but I got involved in multivariate in the multivariate book. And I quickly learned to love data analysis. I can't say that I love statistics early on, but I eventually began to love statistics and really enjoy it. And that led me to doing research because I could always find someone who was interested in the theory, in the conceptual side, and my specialization was in data analysis. So that's really how I got started, is beginning at Ole Miss and then continuing my years with a lot of colleagues, good colleagues at LSU, and later on at all the universities I work with.
Yeah, yeah. So during this long career, you've made several types of, gone through different career stages. You started off making the transition to become a faculty member, and then you went through the transition of going from an untenured assistant to more of a mid-career associate, and then finally reaching the stage of a full professor. So those three different kinds of distinct transitions. So what do you remember most about those transitions, and what advice would you offer to students and faculty as they anticipate going through those changes?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that even today, I think that they need to invest in their career, and particularly based on my knowledge, not only of doctoral programs over the years, but still currently, I think that they need to invest in learning research and how to do it. We teach a lot of skills in the program, and a lot of those skills focus on what is marketing and what's the theory and what's the conceptual basis, and we teach methods, but it doesn't matter. I won't say it doesn't matter. I mean, some programs are as short as 3 or 4 years, most are 5 or 6, but to me, it doesn't really matter how long. It seems to me like the graduates that either over the years or even currently today, when they graduate, they still need to learn about the specifics of research and also publishing. We simply can't teach everything in the program. And so I think when you get out, it's important to develop an interest in and focus on how do you transition as an individual from the book learning and the concepts and the skills you learned in the doctoral program to how you actually apply them in the field. And so the early years are really important because that teaches you a lot about time management, and it teaches you about what it takes to be a publisher, and you need to find mentors along that road. So the early stage really is an investment. The second stage is as you move to associate is that is, I think, expanding the footprint of what you do, and trying to work more broadly with other faculty, both at your university as well as other universities, networking, basically spreading the knowledge that you gain not only in your doctoral program, but in the early years. And then as you evolve into full professor or chaired professor, that's the time that I believe you really need to be committed to serving your community. And all of this really is based upon lifelong learning. And I would like to encourage and try to motivate my colleagues, and particularly young colleagues, to pursue the lifelong learning. We hear about it a lot, but it's too often overlooked. And so as you get to be the full professor level, what you need to do is to say, it's time for me to give back. And it's time for me to give back with what I've learned, so that the young professors and the associate professors, and truthfully even some of the full professors, have in fact continued to be committed to their field and sharing new methodologies and new methods and the things that they've learned over the years that have helped them to be successful in their academic career.
You know, a lot of faculty, it's suggested that as they go through the stages, particularly going from being an untenured assistant to an associate, that it gives them the freedom to take on projects or pursue topics that they, for whatever reason, couldn't feel like they could do before they got to that stage. Was that true of you at all?
Yes, it was true of me partially. The area that it's not truly is that I must admit, in taking on the multivariate book, that was probably, or perhaps a foolish decision in some ways, but it's also probably the best decision I ever made, because that's what I'm known for in my career. So I was lucky. I invested early in the area of multivariate and worked with my colleagues to write the book, and that helped me, but I didn't neglect the other areas. So yes, I would say we have flexibility at that stage, and honestly, I can certainly tell others today that there are things that I don't really feel motivated to do and I'm not interested in doing, and I can pick and choose. And the area where I pick and choose now to do that, which is really great, I think, to me anyway, it's great, is that my principal commitment these days is towards doctoral education and my doctoral students. And so today I have the flexibility of working on a wide variety of topics with my doctoral students that I can just pick up and go to a new area and really enjoy learning about that new area. Whereas in my earlier years, I had to say, no, stay focused. When you're focused, it helps you to publish. I mean, knowing the literature is really essential to being successful in publishing. And so in the earlier years, I had to spend more time in knowing the literature. And I'm not saying I don't know the literature today, but I have the flexibility that I can follow my students and learn new areas. I don't become the expert, but it really is super to be able to do that. And a good example of that is in the last 2 or 3 months with a doctoral student, I've really become interested in the field of social robotics and the impact of that. And it's going to be in management as well as in marketing and a lot of other fields. And so in earlier years, I probably might have had to dismiss that, but now I can in fact learn about that area and spend some time that would take away perhaps from other areas that I've already got knowledge of, but I'm just interested in this because it's such an emerging, interesting area.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, so Joe, you kind of mentioned this, always maintaining the balance between your substantive interest and your methodological or quantitative interest. How do you think you are impacted by having that balance as compared to somebody that maybe goes more on the quant method side and doesn't have that type of substantive balance? So what's it like being on that interface for you? How does that affect you and your approach to things?
Well, I would describe my interest other than methodology as being quite eclectic. And what I would say is I've been able to be eclectic because of my method side. I always had those skills. I don't say always, but after about 10 years, I had sufficient skills in the methods as long as I maintained them that I could publish and continue to be a contributing scholar. But that balance and the desire to be involved in the content or the substance side enabled me to let's say, spend a little time in different areas and do things that I was interested in. Whereas if you're a methodologist and only a methodologist, then you're limited to the situation of waiting to find a colleague who can execute the substance side and work with you. Whereas when in fact you have skills and interest in both sides, then you can identify ideas and talk to colleagues about them And the example of social robotics is one of the things that is an example of my knowledge of substance and what's happening and how it might impact marketing and research in general. So I've constantly, from my reading, not just on the scholarly side, but I read business publications, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and so forth, and I look for trends that are emerging because that's where I get my ideas, and I'm constantly saying, wow, that's new and different. How is that potentially going to impact marketing and management and scholarly research? And then I can bring that in and talk to my colleagues, and I can say, you've been working in something that's related to this area. Why don't you take a look at this if you haven't already thought about it and explore it? And what about the possibilities that this might open a new area of interest in research in marketing or management or the social sciences in general?
Yeah, yeah. You know, so I think we're very similar in terms of our having this kind of balance of substance and methods. And I finally reached a point where I came to believe that it helped me be a better instructor of statistics and research methods because I saw the world through a substantive researcher's eyes. And I knew what their questions were, and I could formulate an answer and then come in and use equations as necessary to inform that. Whereas somebody that's more purely quantitative, they want to just kind of start with the equations and think that everything is self-evident. So do you think having that kind of balance impacts the way you teach your quantitative courses?
Definitely I do. And that's an excellent point to bring up, because not being trained in statistics, in fact, a lot of people really can't believe this, and I share it with them. None of us in my doctoral program, none of the students had any training in multivariate or even in advanced statistics. And so I tell people that I never had a course in statistics except probability at the undergrad level. And I made a C in that, and I promised myself I'd never take another stats course, and I haven't, and people just can't believe it. But what that's done is to lead me to say, I want to demonstrate to people the value of statistics and how it can be useful above and beyond learning some fundamental formulas, that you need to learn what's in the black box and how to use it. So that's been my focus, much more so than formulas. But to directly answer your question, how it's led me is I'm convinced, and I think a lot of other people are convinced, that when you teach methods, it's a complicated subject, and there's a limit to how much people can process in their mind the difficult concepts of statistics. And so when I teach it, I like to talk a little bit about the methods and what they can do, and then give examples. And I wrote an opinion piece a number of years ago where they asked me about teaching multivariate. And one of the things I emphasize in there is examples. We often say, well, here's what discriminant validity is, and we give them a definition, but then if you don't give an example, then it's often too difficult. And what's convergent validity, and what is goodness of fit? You need examples, and those examples often come from the literature side and the substantive side, because that brings it to life. It's the real life that people can relate to, particularly individuals that they lack a lot of knowledge about methods, and they're finding it challenging. And so it's enough of a hurdle for them to just learn the basic concepts and ideas about multivariate and statistics. And it's always, I think, it's definitely helpful to them to be able to have an example, and a practical example in a substantive area that they've been exposed to and can relate to.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that I find that happens is that a lot of times graduate students, they view their learning of statistics and research methods as something that they're going to do when they're in graduate school, and that's going to be all that they need to know throughout their career. And of course, if you look for the time that we have been involved in our professions, there have been so many dramatic changes, and you really do have to have a spirit of kind of lifelong learning. You're going to have to be constantly teaching yourself. And I imagine that's kind of something that you promote in your teaching philosophy as well.
I definitely do that. And unfortunately, and I don't mean to be too critical here, because we all have our areas of interest and emphasis, but I not only observe that in the doctoral students that I've worked with, unfortunately, I have observed it over the years in a lot of people after they are out and in their career, whether it's assistant, associate, and full. They did learn the methods, they were exposed to them, and what they do is they say, well, I like regression, I know it, why do I need to work on SIM? Or if I know SIM, then why do I need to learn hierarchical linear modeling? Or particularly one of my frustrations in the last 5 or 6 years is that I run into faculty and they say, well, I've learned and applied covariance-based SIM with Amos or Listral for the last 30 years, and it's worked well for me. Why do I need to learn partial least squares? And it's led to criticisms by people of the partial least squares method, which is in fact the seminar we're going to have. And in fact, most of these individuals don't even realize and have been unwilling to invest even a little bit of time to learn that partial least squares is a combination of two techniques that they've all been exposed to and almost all of them have used, and that's ordinary least squares, multiple regression, and principal components analysis. And so they say it's not useful, or it's different, or it's not needed because we have covariance-based SIM, when in fact its objectives and its value are very different than covariance-based SIM, and there are a lot of areas that it can be applied that the covariance-based SIM cannot be compared. So to summarize that, what I would say is they've learned and started using over their career 1 or 2 methods, and they're not open enough to what's happening in the methodology area, and at least investing enough to say, wow, this might be something that would be useful to me. Either I need to learn it, or I need to find a colleague and a co-author who can help me in terms of supporting that kind of new methodology.
Yeah. Hey, so let me just add a quick follow-up to that. Since you're talking about the diversity of methods and analysis tools, within the area of management, there was a time where there was a lot of tension between those favoring qualitative approaches and those favoring quantitative approaches. And we've now seen, I think from my vantage point, with the journal Organizational Research Methods, or with the Research Methods Division of the Academy, there's an increased appreciation from both sides of the value of the other side. And in fact, there's also that interest in mixed methods. So is there anything like, how is that type of tension manifests itself in the area of marketing?
Well, actually, it's been, I would say, a similar kind of transition. And it's kind of like marketing made movements that management didn't, and then management caught up and moved ahead of marketing. So it's back and forth in terms of who's moving in what direction. But I think we really need to extend it beyond the U.S. Because a lot of my success in the multivariate area has really been outside the U.S. Of course, I've had some success in the U.S., but early in my career was when the multivariate area really began evolving, and people became excited about it. And it helped us to publish, and we moved ahead. And realistically, in my opinion, we forgot about qualitative. And I'm guilty of it, just like I'm sure there are a lot of others. But in marketing in general, as I observe over the years, I think that by the time we hit the mid-90s or certainly the early 2000s, people in the field of marketing began to realize that, wait a minute, we have been overlooking the qualitative side. And so in the last 15 or so years, maybe 20 in marketing, we began to reawaken our interest in the qualitative side and to pursue, I think, a much more balanced approach. Unfortunately, I think there's some individuals who haven't caught up with that.
Oh, yeah.
And, one of the criticisms that I have of scholarly journals these days is that too many of them continue to be too quantitative and not enough in terms of balanced. And particularly, I know that in the management area, one of the areas that you've been ahead of marketing is that you developed and started a conceptual theoretical journal probably 10 or 15 years ago. And in marketing, we only evolved to that stage in the last 4 or 5 years. So when I was young in my career, we talked about qualitative, but then we became very quantitative, and now we've swung back. So it's kind of like I said earlier, marketing and management to me are very similar. In fact, I have a minor in management, so I've always been interested. It led to my interest in sales and sales management. But the fields to me are very similar, and we've been parallel, but sometimes it's kind of like competition and the theory of retail competition. Sometimes you're focusing on the idea of matching your competitor, and then you think about, well, I need to move ahead, not just be equivalent to. So in marketing and management, sometimes the management scholars have moved ahead of us, and sometimes we've moved ahead of them. But to me, overall, it's so great that we're now much more in the arena of mixed methods than we were for many years. And when we talk about the international market, Europe, I had some opportunities in Europe for a number of years because they were really behind the US in terms of continuing to focus on the qualitative side and not really learning enough about the quantitative side. So I don't want to label them as laggards, but they've caught up, and now I think that we're all in a very similar area. And if we extend that really to our more recent colleagues from Asia, that they're beginning to see, I think, the value of mixed methods, although they initially became interested in the quantitative side because I think of the perceptions that the scholarly journals were emphasizing quantitative too much. But my observations are, and this is a big statement, but the world in management and marketing, the scholars that are globally, I think that in general, they're moving much more towards mixed methods because the qualitative side is a fundamental building block to the quantitative side. And I see so many people, and I say so many people, I've seen these people over the years that think that the quantitative approach can make them successful and that they don't need to learn the qualitative side. And we're moving into an area where they appreciate that you really need both in order to be successful long-term in a scholarly career.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned that as kind of an observation about journals and publishing. So let me kind of, since we're here, broaden this to ask kind of about whether there are any other aspects of the scholarly publishing journal endeavor as you've seen it evolve over recent years, things that concern you.
Well, let me just first hit the point of conceptual theoretical journals. Management has one, we have one, and we need a lot more. I still strongly believe in the quantitative side, but we need more scholarly journals that focus on the qualitative side and the conceptual and the theoretical development, because I think we've gotten behind in that. Secondly, in the area of research, I think that there still continue to be, and this is probably a result of the 30 or 40 years, at least in marketing and to some extent management, that we focus so much on methodological and quantitative that we still have too many journals that focus too much on the quantitative side, and that emphasis on quantitative side means that the audiences are very small, and you end up developing a small clique. And like as a good example, I published in the Journal of Marketing Research, but it's so narrow today that I can't publish there. I might be able to find a quantitative colleague who could help me, but it's just too narrow. And truthfully, I can't remember the last time I ran into more than one or two people who said, that's my journal. And so we need to move beyond that stage and say, okay, how about we focus not only on the conceptual and theoretical, but the applied side of the marketing and management concepts so that we can speak to a much broader audience. And then third, what I would say is, unfortunately, sometimes I believe that reviewers are too picky about narrow kinds of things. And in marketing, we call it common methods bias, and in management, you guys call it mono methods. Yes, we need to be sensitive to it, but it seems to me like if you are knowledgeable about it and you learn how to address it on the front end of your research, that it's not the fatal flaw that it's sort of been made out to be. I'm not saying it's not important, but I think for a while it became, wow, if you didn't focus on this, your research that you've invested a lot of time in, it's no good.
Yeah.
So another example of that, and when we get into this is research in general, but I think there's continues to be too much emphasis on statistical significance and not enough on the concept of power. And so what we need to do is to say, yes, statistical significance is power. Statistical significance is important, but power is also important. And by the way, not finding significance can also provide useful information, and in some instances, just as much as finding statistical significance.
Yeah, so I'd say that your comment about power is just a great one, because there are so many areas about where we push our people to learn the latest techniques, and they're worried about using this particular approach or that particular approach, but the single thing that hurts them the most is the thing that they focus on the least, which is increasing the power of their tests.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm really sad about this, but I have to tell you, very, very few of my colleagues know what power is. And I also believe, and I'm sorry, but I think that a lot of our graduate students, doc students, are not being taught power. And so you mentioned that, and it's like a blank face.
Yeah. Hey, so I wanted to focus a little bit on how you, having been through different universities, having been involved in the profession and in the classroom for as long as you have, as you kind of look back on your approach to things over that time period, how have you changed, or how have you evolved as a teacher or a researcher in terms of where you're at now versus where you started earlier in your career?
Wow, that's a lot. So I'll try to summarize this. Let's talk about teaching first. This is one of the things that I think is most unfortunate, but like most grads in my day, I had no training in teaching. It was just assumed that if you if you get your doctorate, you know your field and you can teach. Unfortunately, that's not changed a bunch over the years. And I'll say that myself, that you have so much to educate doctoral students about. And so my priorities are on substance and theory and methods, and too little focus has been on teaching my doctoral students to teach. So I think, to me, that's been a problem for 50 years. It continues to be a problem. But how did I grow? Well, you know, it was experiment and fail, and experiment and success, and I learned. And so how did I do that? Well, I mean, over time, it was like I reflected on what worked and what didn't work. I listened to others. I observed what the successful ones were doing. I observed what I thought was not working. And so basically, I observed people, and they became mentors, but not true mentors. Mentors in the sense that I learned from them, but they probably didn't know that I was learning from them. And that's how the teaching is gone. So I like to say that I'm committed to investing more time in teaching, but I don't know that I will, because I guess I learned a lot about it, and I get very good evaluations, not bragging there, but it's really because we need to be sensitive to, are we doing a good job, and are we not doing a good job, and are we communicating, and look at the nonverbal as well as the verbal, and not just the exams or the papers, but to think about and ask our students and listen to our students, and then help particularly the doctoral students to learn to be better teachers.
Yeah.
On the research side, as you know, my early emphasis was methods, and it's still methods, and probably, I'm sure 50% or more of what I do these days on the scholarly side is really methods. I mean, I've been doing it for 50 years and or longer, you know, and I guess I could call myself an expert. People still frequently ask me to come, you know, help them to learn the new techniques, and so that's something that I've had a passion about since about the early year when I was exposed to it. When one of the things you mentioned the other day about what was my best and worst memories about grad school, and one of the worst memories was about multivariate, believe it or not, because we had no training in following the Carnegie and Ford reports about business education being too vocational. The University of Florida hired some new professors to help us learn about, you know, scholarly activities that involved empirical research. And so one of my worst memories was we got one new professor who came in from UCLA, and he basically mandated that we do multivariate. So one of my worst memories is the few days or few weeks that followed that, when I said, wow, I've done very good in marketing, and now I'm going to have to use multivariate in my dissertation. And by the way, I have a year to finish my dissertation, and the job I had, which was Ole Miss, said, if you come here, if you don't have your degree in hand, you're going to earn 50% of what we're offering you. And I'm newly married too, so, you know, I got to get this thing done. So my worst memory is that, but the truth is my best memory is what that led to over the years. So anyway.
Yeah. Hey, so just quickly tell us what the transition like has been to your new school.
Well, you know, actually the transition has been superb. A little frustrating because, well, as you know, I was very involved in starting a DBA program at Kennesaw State University. It's a non-traditional doctoral program, and we had a lot of success. Graduated 84 people in my 7 years there at the program, and they we placed them, almost all of them, in ACSB universities. And so my transition here was to work with the University of South Alabama to develop their program, which started and was patterned really about, after the Kennesaw one, but to work with them to grow and expand their program. And so what I would say, it's learning a new system and what works here and what doesn't work there, which is the administrative component, which I've always had some administrative component, but it's not my first love. So
Yeah.
what I would say, the transition has been good, and they're treating me very well, and they've helped me out a lot, and they've permitted me to continue to do workshops at universities here in the U.S. and a lot of them outside, and to extend the global footprint of a university that is at an earlier stage rather than like the University of Lincoln, Nebraska, or like LSU or Georgia or whatever. They've allowed me to help them do that, and they supported me in other ways, but it's been a struggle somewhat to keep up, continue publishing it at the level that I was prior to that, where I wasn't so involved in the administrative side. So I think that now, after 2 years here, I've pretty much addressed the need for administrative development and functioning and process. And I'm really, as I did for the last 20 or 30, I'm really enjoying my doctoral students. We have really superb doctoral students. I just had one send me an email yesterday, and she said that she got her first journal publication. This is just her second year in the program.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and others of them, they're presenting papers in the area of management. We have an individual in management who just got recognized by SMA, your SMA, for the outstanding graduate student paper. And so all of that is so rewarding, and that's what I'm committed to, and that's what this university supports, is really working to advance doctoral education in both marketing and management. We only had the management program when I came here, so the first year I added the marketing, and so the first year we didn't have as many marketing students, but now in the second year we have about an equal number of marketing and management, and we're recruiting for our next year, and it's been a lot of fun. The frustration I have really is not here. The frustration that I have, which is not a big frustration, because I think after having worked in the area of non-traditional programs, DBAs now for almost 10 years, that we have begun to educate people about the doctoral programs and the DBAs, at least the research emphasis DBAs, that they're very comparable to a traditional program. But what we've done is basically we've repackaged them just like marketing repackaged, and that it is possible to graduate quality students who can be competitive in the marketplace. Is it different? Yes, it's different. But in terms of the programs I've been involved in, the amount of face-to-face time and coursework is fairly comparable to most other programs that are the traditional ones. And the really nice advantage to this is, I remember in my years at LSU and Ole Miss, and I'm not being really critical here, but the students that we had were young. They had very little business experience. All of the people in these programs have management experience ranging from 5 to 10 to perhaps 20 or 30. And when you ask them about what problems do you want to investigate, they have personal experience with these problems. And so their problem is not, how do I come up with a topic to write papers on, and it's not, how do I come up with a topic for my dissertation? It's, how do I select from all the really interesting things that I've seen, some go right and some go wrong over the years, and which one of these am I going to focus on in my doctoral research?
Yeah. So the reason I'm chatting with you is because of your upcoming webcast, October 26th. Can you give us an overview?
Sure, be glad to. First thing I'm going to do is to talk about structural equation modeling and the field. Not a lot, because almost all, I think, participants in the program will have self-selected to watch this, and hopefully we'll get some people who maybe haven't exposed in the past, but know that my focus over the years is on simplifying technical and complex methods where a lot more people can learn and understand and apply them. So following just the overview of structural equation modeling, then I'll compare the covariance space SEM with the partially square SEM. I'll also compare the PLS with regression and principal components, which it is, basically a combination of the two, with an additional advantage is that within principal components, we examine constructs and we examine the measurement characteristics, but we only focus on the independent variables. Partially squares focuses not only on the independent or exogenous constructs, it takes into consideration the dependent or the endogenous constructs. So to talk about how it is a technique which has advantages, it also has limitations, and to compare some of the advantages and limitations of both covariance-based SEM and partially squares. I'll talk a little bit about my frustrations in convincing the people that have spent 30 years of their life on covariance-based SEM, the frustrations and the pushback from them to not use it. What this reminds me of is, and most people these days haven't been around as long as I have, but I remember it in the early 70s when I started in this area. There was a similar kind of stream of criticism of what we call factor analysis, which we now call exploratory factor analysis. And so today's criticisms and comments that are negative about PLS are very similar to that era when EFA was unknown and people were, let's say, perhaps scared or simply didn't understand it. And today, I think it's similar. We seem to have moved beyond that a little bit, but that's been something that I've been frustrated with, because many of the scholars who have relied upon structural modeling in the past with covariance-based SEM have been unwilling to open their mind and say, both of these methods have value. We just need to identify where the value is and where the advantages are and the limitations, and be able to select which one of these is in fact the most important. The other thing about it is I'm going to talk about the fact that the covariance-based SEM has and continues to be focused on how we confirm theory, and that PLS will in fact be able to confirm theory. We're working on that, but the emphasis and the focus on PLS is much more so on prediction. And individuals that have been educated in covariance-based SEM, lots of them don't know that the focus on covariance-based SEM is not really on prediction, and it's not really a good predictor, particularly in terms of external validity. So we're going to talk about external validity as opposed to internal validity, and the value of more of a balance in terms of methods and how we move forward. And so that's what we're going to talk about, and hopefully the people that listen to the seminar will at least come with an open mind and say, well, okay, it has some possibilities. Maybe I need to rethink what my thinking has been in the past.
Yeah. Well, I'm very grateful that you would take your time this morning to chat and share so much of your experiences. And we're really grateful that you'll be coming to Lincoln on October 26th. And I will look forward to meeting you and chatting with you in person there. So thanks so much, and have a great day. And we'll look forward to seeing you in Lincoln soon.
Great. Thanks for inviting me, Larry. I look forward to it too.
All right. Push that button.